I was just welcoming those who are joining us. Maybe you've just joined us. You're welcome to this international conference that's going to run for the next couple of days. You are encouraged to just check the different links that have been sent, the different posters that will lead you to the different sessions, as well as plenary in terms of technological links, or the Zoom links will be shared in the next couple of days. Now, without much further ado, we will go to the next part in our program and have a keynote talk that will be presented to us by Professor Stephen Vertovec. And just as he gets ready, I think I wouldn't be doing much justice if I didn't read out his bio, which is very long, and I would say has been an inspiration in terms of the work that he has brought out, even as Professor Bart had said just as we were starting in the very beginning, and Dr. Sadar had retaliated. So Professor Stephen Vertovec is the founding director of the Max Planck Institute for the Study of Religious and Ethnic Diversity, based in the University of Göttingen in Germany. And he has also been professor at the University of Oxford. He has been director at the British Economic and Social Research Council Center on Migration Policy and Society, known as Compass. He is the core editor of a journal, Global Network, and the editor of Palgrave Macmillan book series known as the Global Diversities. He has held several fellowships from various universities in California, Warwick, Berlin, among others, as well as British Columbia. He has been the author of various publications on diaspora and various other topics on transnationalism. And there is a long list that you can look up onto the website of the organization. Professor Vertovec has also been an expert contributing to a lot of research work, whether it be with various international organizations, including the European Commission, the World Bank, as well as some United Nations agency. He has also done some work for the UK Home Office, as well as German foundations. And like I said, there's a long list of publications and research projects that he has done. So I think that it is very fitting that that he has accepted to give us a keynote speech on complexifying complex diasporas. Professor Stephen Vertovec, you are welcome.
Well, thanks very much, Patty. Kind introduction. It's a really hard act to follow, Ambassador Swing, giving a great overview and pointing to important ways forward. I hope my talk might complement a few of the things that he was saying, but probably without as much power as he can add, given his long experience. I'd really like to thank, first of all, the organizers as well for inviting me to give the opening keynote here. You know, it's flattering and a real honor, especially for such an event, bringing together a number of organizations around the world, participants around the world. So I hope I can live up to the challenge. And just before I start too, I have to say that this almost didn't happen. I almost missed this whole event because recently we changed times in Germany, where I'm speaking from. And luckily my secretary picked up a kind of last minute and very clever message from the organizers saying, kindly check for winter time changes. So I was almost a full hour off of this event. So I'm glad they were on top of the case and reminded us. Okay, well, speaking of time, I've been asked to speak for about 25 minutes. I'll do my best to keep to that. I don't want to overstay my welcome. If I can share my screen, if that works. I hope you can see that. If some colleagues can give a nod if you can see that.
Yes, sir. We can see.
Great. Okay, good. So complexifying complex diasporas. So what do I mean by that? Well, what I thought is a good way to open a conference is just to look at some of the concepts that we use. And so this talk, that won't be heavily data driven, although I've got a little bit of data in here. It's mostly about concepts and terms that we're using and will continue to use throughout the next 3-4 days as well. So I'm just going to review certain meanings behind some key terms that I think we need to think about and try to relate them together. And there you see at the bottom of the screen, I'll give my kind of through message or takeaway right at the beginning, so you can bear it in mind throughout what I'm saying. I'm pointing to two notions of the idea of complexifying. First, we need to recognize how the phenomena that we're looking to understand, migration, diasporas, and transnationalism, all these phenomena are themselves getting more complex. So we need to complexify in that sense, that the world is complexifying. Migration streams and diasporas are complexifying. And we also need ourselves as social scientists, as academics and scholars who look at these things, have to develop ways to arrive at more complex understandings ourselves, to change our methods, our analytics, our theories, to be able to get a better grasp of the ways that the world is getting more complex around us. So this is why I'm calling complexifying complex diasporas. So I'll show you more of what I mean. Okay, so these two key terms that the conference will be dealing with, diaspora and transnationalism. Well, you know, there's umpteen books and hundreds of articles written around trying to define these terms. I've written a number of things myself. And so I'm just laying forward my understandings of these terms, and you can challenge them, criticize them however you want over the next days, but I'll just lay out the way I understand these terms. For me, diaspora immediately has two different senses. One is a kind of demographic sense, simply talking about a dispersed social formation of people around the world or around a region purporting to have a common origin, whether that be ethnic, linguistic, religious, national, whatever. So it refers to a kind of countable demographic. The other sense of diaspora, one that I've worked more with, is people's own subjective sense of being part of a globally dispersed community on whatever grounds they're basing it on. Again, religion, language, region of origin, country, village, whatever it is. People's own sense of identifying with people elsewhere. So these are two key senses of diaspora. Now, transnationalism, I've been kind of frustrated over the years that people use diaspora and transnationalism interchangeably. I make the distinction that for transnationalism, we should talk about actual exchanges across borders amongst people. Social exchanges amongst families, amongst people coming from the same areas or the same countries, economic exchanges. Ambassador Swift noted the importance of global remittances. That's a key mode of economic transnationalism that we see. I'll say a little bit about that at the end. Political exchanges and membership and voting rights and mobilization around the world amongst diasporas, religious engagement, cultural exchanges of various kinds, the actual exchanges that people have across borders. And so if you take those definitions, I would say that all acts of transnationalism entail a notion of diaspora. That is, people are making cross-border exchanges, social, economic, etc., within a social formation spanning the world. So all transnationalism entails diasporas, but not all diasporas always entail transnationalism. And I know this for, you know, my original first book was on Indians and Hindus, particularly in Trinidad, in the Caribbean. And these are people who had a strong sense, this was work undertaken in the 1980s, before we had a lot of internet activism and so forth. But this was a population that came in the 19th century to the Caribbean as indentured laborers, had a strong sense of religious and national identity and consciousness, but had absolutely no contact with India and with Hindu organizations and so forth. So this was a diaspora without transnationalism, if you see what I mean. So transnationalism always entails diasporas. Diasporas don't always entail transnationalism. Now, when I'm talking about we need to think of how things are complexifying, I'll try to stitch together these various concepts I'll lay out in a moment. But as I said, one of the real takeaway messages is our need to recognize complexity. And here I'm drawing particularly of complexity theory, which comes largely out of mathematics and physics, but also there have been a number of attempts by social scientists to bring complexity theory into the way we do social science. And there are some books at the bottom of the screen, just for instance. So again, drawing from complexity theory, we can say that situations of increasing complexity arise when you have a mixture of the following: an increase in the number of agents or parts of a system. So in this case, we're talking about the rise in the number of people within a diaspora, or the rise in the number of migrants, like Ambassador Swing was talking about. But that's combined not just with the rise of number, but an increase in the differentiation of the characteristics of those people in the rising numbers. Characteristics, which I'll come to in a little bit as well, but things like different gender balances, different age and education levels, different legal statuses, different occupational specialties, and so forth. So we have an increase in number of agents, increase in the differentiation of the characteristics of those rising numbers, and an increase in the interdependence of the numbers and the characteristics. That is, we see new patterns forming. But when you have increasing complexification, this is just a kind of rule of thumb in complexity theory, you also have much higher contingency, and you don't know how things are going to develop. They're rather unstable systems until some new system emerges. And then maybe that system is called into question by further increases in numbers, differentiation, and interdependence. And so I'll make clear sense of this in a moment by way of migration, but just to bear that these are the kind of key ingredients I'm talking about when talking about increasing complexity. Okay, and we can apply all of these to migrants and diasporas and transnationalism. Now, already, this way of thinking has been applied to notions of diasporas, and I'm thinking of this particularly in a really good book by my good friend and co-author Robin Cohen, put together with his colleague Carolyn Fisher in this Handbook of Diaspora Studies. They have a whole section devoted to the notion of a complex diaspora. And first of all, they coined this term in order to critique or to respond to criticisms of notions of diaspora that were being made since the early 2000s of the idea of diaspora. People said, yes, the idea of diaspora, we have to recognize people spread around the world, but the term can be too homogenizing. It treats all people of a common origin as being inherently similar in all respects. And of course, that can't be the case. And so in response to a kind of homogenizing idea of diaspora, Cohen and Fisher and other colleagues talk about complex diasporas. This notion is intended to recognize internal complexities within diasporas, including the fact, let's take in mind the Indian diaspora, that it indeed itself might be multi-ethnic, multi-faith, multilingual, multi-cohort, meaning different waves or generations of migration, multi-mobile, people able to move at different speeds and capacities, and hybrid diasporas, the way that within a diaspora, certain people have blended cultural, linguistic, and other elements with other cultural backgrounds. And internal differences are also complicated by things like class differences within a diaspora. The fact that within a single diaspora, in sort of political sentiments, you'll have some people who are much more sort of nationalist, even right-wing, versus people who are very much more cosmopolitan in their sentiments. The way that gender intersects with other variables and characteristics further complicates diaspora populations, even in a single country. And so the notion of complex diaspora has already been there since really the last couple of years. And just again, to give one kind of example, particularly for this audience, People might have seen, this is a very recent survey that was just published by the Carnegie Endowment looking at Indian American political attitudes, particularly in the run-up to the elections this week. And it's shown that amongst people in the Indian diaspora in the USA, they're very, their political horizons and attitudes are very dispersed. And again, I would say that these largely reflect aspects of complexity, aspects of migration cohort or generation, age, education, locality within the US, employment, legal status, etc. All of these things combine to give us complex pictures of things like political ideologies within a particular diaspora. So this is the notion of complex diaspora. And well, for reasons which I'll continue to go on with in a moment, also we have to bear in mind that very new developments around, well, again, Ambassador Swing already called this one about increasing digitalization, digital transfers within diasporas. This has been a boom field in diaspora and transnationalism studies over the last few years. There's a number of books out now on what's called online transnationalism or digital diasporas. The way that new technologies like Zoom that we're talking on and Skype and WhatsApp and other social media are transforming the ways that people are actually able to engage with loved ones, with political movements, with economic investment, et cetera, online around the world. So this is further complexifying the ways that transnational activity takes place these days. We just have to continue to keep these things in mind and develop tools to understand what's going on out there. Particularly, again, a boom field that we do some research on here at our institute is what's called transnational care as well, the way that families take care of their elderly loved ones around the world now, often online. Okay, so yet another term dealing with complexity that I've written quite a bit about over the last years, which I want to make the case intersects with the argument I'm making about the complexification of diasporas and transnationalism, is this term superdiversity that I coined. And it particularly refers to changes in migration flows over the last 30 years or so. Now, Ambassador Swift importantly pointed out that yes, indeed, over the last couple of decades, numbers have certainly risen quite substantially in the number of global migrants. And that's reflecting, the rising population of the world as well. Although the proportion of migrants, as he's rightly pointed out, is at around 3%. And that hasn't changed much over the last 30 years or more. However, the point is, and we can show this, and I'll show one or two graphics on this, it's not the same people who have been migrating over the last 30 years. Even though 3% has been the regular percentage of the global population migrating, that's comprised of very different people than it was 30 or more years ago. I often like to talk about it that over 30 years ago, or let's say particularly in the 1960s and 70s, you had large movements of people coming from a few places and going to a few places. Now we have more people, but in smaller numbers, moving from many places, going to many places. And so that's the change in numbers that I was talking about. The change, the differentiation of characteristics has to do with also the fact that this contemporary migration movement is made up of very different combinations of nationality, ethnicity, language, religion, age, gender, legal status, skills, and human capital. And that's what I talk about as new conditions of superdiversity worldwide. Not super meaning powerful or dominant, but super in the sense that it supersedes earlier patterns of migration and diversity that we had over 30 years ago. So just to show one sort of graphic, this is a cool graphic done by a guy named Guy Abel in Austria using some of the recent UN data. And what this shows is global flows of people from, it's not by country, it's by region. So you see North America, Caribbean, Central America. Here's South Asian down here. So you see, if you can see my little hand cursor, hopefully. In 1990, this is what global flows of migrants looked like. And here you see a very large swathe of people coming from South Asia, going elsewhere in South Asia. The little arrow points to where they're going to. Okay, so you had large flows of people, a number of smaller flows as well. What I'm going to do is click a moving visualization so that as the years change, you'll see in every region of the world, smaller and smaller arrows filling out these numbers. And that's what I'm talking about, is we're seeing flows from more places to more places in smaller numbers. Okay, so if I click the graphic, it's not moving. Okay, well, the technology is not with me. I don't know why that's the case. I'm sorry about that, but you'll have to bear with me or look it up yourself at guyable.com. An excellent graphic showing how, so we get up to 2020, all of these numbers are filled up with smaller and smaller streams of people. Okay, I don't know why that's not moving. I'm sorry about that. Okay, let's not hold us back. Now, another thing, besides people coming from more places, moving to more places, and so diasporas getting more dispersed with changing characteristics, changing legal statuses is a hugely important part of what I'm talking about as super diversity, and it's really affecting the nature of diasporas and transnationalism, making them more complex. So what you have here, it's a bit of an eyeful. I'll quickly explain it. This is just within Germany where I live. These are some of the largest current countries of origin: Syria, Turkey, India, China, Serbia, Iraq, and so forth. And within that particular migrant population in Germany, this is just a picture of the different legal statuses people are within. So I've underlined for your interest India here. 21% of Indians in Germany have come to study. 22% have some sort of employment visa. 19% have come under some grounds of family reunion. 31% have special grounds. If you broke that down, there would be multiple visa types, some of them longer than others, some of them very short stayed, and then other sorts of rights and temporary status given. So I just use this to show, again, this is part of the complexification that as people are moving around the world now, we've seen a proliferation of legal statuses and migration channels in most countries around the world. And they are themselves getting more and more complex in terms of the rights offered to people, how long people can stay, what obligations people have, and what restrictions apply to people. And these different legal statuses very much affect what people can do, where they can live, how long they can stay there, what kind of health care and education they can give their families, et cetera, et cetera. So legal status, changing legal statuses is yet another way that diasporas are getting more complex, because within a single diaspora, you'll have, as I say, even just Indians in Germany, you have very differential patterns of legal status. Okay, so part of my general message on migration-driven diversification and conditions of superdiversity is that over the last 30 years and continuing now, migrants are increasingly channeled by way of their migration stream, their country of origin, legal status, all these things I was talking about. People, we can see in migration patterns, the way that certain migration streams are very gendered, are very specific to age, are very specific to certain countries of origin, and very specific to countries of destination. So migrants are increasingly channeled into highly differential positions. So again, largely based on their legal status and their migration streams. People have different opportunities and constraints for what they can do economically, politically, where they live, and so forth. And these different channels and differential positions are creating new urban configurations. As most migrants are heading to cities, different levels of equality, different kinds of integration and exclusion, conflict, privilege, precarity. And so it's this kind of three-dimensional puzzle or stratification system that we have to look at in terms generally about people moving around the world, and within any one particular diaspora, these patterns apply as well. Very differential, highly stratified positions by way of how people migrated and under what conditions. Okay, so these are some of the ways that I'm trying to conceptually combine, well, just in my own kind of background, work on diasporas and transnationalism with notions of superdiversity and complexification. So first of all, what does a notion of superdiversity bring to our understanding of diasporas and transnationalism? Well, as I was just pointing out with the last couple of slides, even within a single diaspora, globally, and even within a same country, we have very different social positions and different kinds of inequality based on how people have moved, their legal status, how they've been able to rejoin their families, what sort of jobs they've been able to get under very contemporary policy conditions. So that's how superdiversity helps us understand the complexification of any single diaspora. Modes of transnational engagement themselves, the way that people remain in contact with their businesses, with their families, with their political parties, with their religious congregations, often have to do with those very unequal positions they have in a society. Some people simply have more capacity to engage transnationally than others. And again, I'll say something at the very end about remittances and that notion. So this is why we can look at the superdiversity, diasporas, and transnationalism as a mode of complexification. What does diasporas and transnationalism bring to the study of transnationalism? Well, despite all of these fragmentations of a single diaspora, we do have to recognize that still people can have a strong diasporic identity that cuts across inequality and social status and legal status and all of these sorts of things. And we've seen that especially in times of disasters. If there's an earthquake or a tidal wave or something, people are able to put aside many kinds of differences within the diaspora and rally as a kind of diasporic identity community. So we're just not looking at a complete fragmentation all the time of populations, that there are things that bind people together in diaspora from time to time. We can talk about hot and cold phases of diasporas, and that's something we have to keep in mind. That's a kind of counter to a lot of the complexification that I'm talking about. We do, though, have to recognize that these different modes, types, degrees, and temporalities of transnationalism, the different ways that people are able to engage transnationally with countries of origin or with compatriots elsewhere, adds to the complexity of superdiverse social configurations themselves. So we have to, I think, constantly try to balance out these three notions: diasporas, transnationalism, and superdiversity. That's part of my overall message. So this is my last slide, hopefully keeping my 25 minutes here. Again, I hope I'm not beating a dead horse too much here, but we need to complexify our understanding of migration, diasporas, and transnationalism. First and foremost, to see what's been going on, especially as new political developments have meant that new ways of, again, what Ambassador Swing was talking about, of trying to manage migration, have created new policy instruments and new legal statuses, which both offer opportunities and restrictions on what migrants and diasporas can actually do outside of their homelands. And this can inadvertently create new kinds of inequality. And this is my final pitch, that especially in light of the pandemic, the economic recession globally that's developing in its wake, and the onset of the climate crisis, which is going to affect all of these patterns of complexification. As scholars who look at these sorts of things, again, my call is that we need to tool up. We need to develop our methods, our analytics, and our theories to be able to understand how things are complexifying. These notions like superdiversity and so forth are just first steps in trying to create a language of talking about new complexities that we can see in the data moving all around us. And just the final thing I'll say is by way of example, as has been pointed out, global remittances, actually in 2019, they came to 706 billion, according to the World Bank. This is one of the major modes of transnationalism that we see around the world today, with incredible importance for development broadly, but also for individual families around the world. And since the pandemic started already in 2020, we've seen that this figure of 706 billion has already declined by 20% and is set to continue to do through the rest of the year and into next year. And this will put many people around the world into dire poverty and hardship. Migrants and their remittances are desperately needed in diaspora communities around the world. And as the pandemic continues, as the economic recession gets worse, and as the climate crisis proceeds, given the kind of inequalities that are already being created around the patterns of complexity I've been talking about, those are going to get worse over the next decade or so due to the recession, the pandemic, and the economic crisis. We have to understand what's going on in these patterns and to think then more cleverly and smartly about how policymakers can intervene to prevent further inequalities around the world that are coming in the wake of these developments and in the wake of all the kinds of new complexities that we're seeing out there. Okay, so that's my 2 cents on the subject. I thank you for listening. I thank the organizers again for having me here. I wish everyone a stimulating and enjoyable conference over the next couple of days. And I hope that some of the things I've said might be of interest for these discussions coming. Thanks very much, Zen.
Professor Vertovec, thank you very much for diving us into that dimension of complexities. And I think it really did reach a level of us having a better understanding, even though, you know, it's such a short, in such a short period of time. But I think the insights were absolutely useful. And I think, you know, I also like the point that you have made in us being able to understand what these complexities mean in terms of us preventing further inequalities. We really need to dig down into the details and sometimes look really beyond the surface for us to understand how we can move this agenda forward. And I think that's, you know, that has a very important bearing, and as you have explained, particularly in the way governments would also engage with diaspora, in the way diaspora would also contribute back home. And I think really tying into what Ambassador Swing had mentioned in looking in having this, you know, what is the positive contribution that migrants bring. And I think this is something to be said, not just where they are in their host countries, but also back home. But understanding these complexities become ever more so important. So thank you very much for taking us into those insights and for enlightening us. We are very honored to have had you here to give us that keynote address. Thank you very much.